La da da da. Hey, goodbye. Good riddance. Hold up.
There's no evidence of anyone arriving in the Americas and noting the existence of black people.
Only rapper to rewrite history without a pen. No ID on the track. Let the story begin.
In our community, I need to clarify this, Dr. Eltis, because there are people trying to find out who they are and constructing, unfortunately, a history. And I'm not saying that in a light way or even mockingly, because it's a real devastation. It's a real trauma. So talk to us about, first off, the indigenous people, meaning Native Americans, because I've heard you say people have interviewed you and they ask you Black indigenous, and from what I've taken from you, you mean African-born, African people who are on the shore, on the land of the Americas, yes, born there, and therefore they are indigenous. Am I correct, or can you clarify that?
Well, indigenous can be used in more than one context.
Right.
Indigenous
I need
people,
you to clarify for us.
I mean, indigenous, the way I use it anyway, typically means people who were born or descended from those that were already in the Americas when the Europeans arrived.
Okay.
And of course, there's a separate history of exploitation and how those numbers interacted. But clearly, if African peoples arrived, they become indigenous in the sense that they have children who are, just like immigrants today, part of the national scene. So it depends how you use the term indigenous. For me, yeah, at no point did I mean to suggest that Africans had arrived somehow in the Americas before the slave trade started. That's not credible.
Thank you. And even though you have clarified that, let's talk about, if I could switch from the word African or the title African for a moment, Black people of the phenotype, such as mine,
yeah,
who match the phenotype of African people.
Yeah.
These type of people, do you have any information and research that people of that phenotype who match African phenotype, but we're not using the word African, just the phenotype, were they in the Americas prior to European and prior to the slave trade?
No. It's a short answer. I mean, the argument against Africans arriving before Columbus is really down to the fact that the native population of the Americas, indigenous, had been here many, of course, thousands of years. And when the Europeans arrived, there was a devastating impact in terms of illness and death, quite apart from any attempts to force people to carry out labor. Just the fact that there was a set of microorganisms which were common in the old world. By that I mean Eurasia.
Right.
And to my mind, if there had been African contact before Columbus, there would have been a dramatic impact on the population. In other words, they would have had exposure to these new organisms before the Europeans arrived. And there would have been an impact on the population. And there would have been signs of this. But there isn't. It's clear that the dramatic impact of microorganisms came after the Europeans and Africans arrived. Because, of course, Africans, too, were bringing their own set of old world microorganisms with them.
Mm-hmm. So going back to, I appreciate this. I've seen a couple of interviews where I don't know what could be going through your mind, where you're like, but I'm kind of laughing, but I shouldn't laugh, because you get to see the way, the devastation, and what the slave trade has done to a group of people.
Yeah.
But I have to believe it or not, I have to ask you again, when you say these indigenous people, because what the group of people that I'm discussing, they want to totally displace or just take over what we know as the people who came through the Bering Strait. The people, they say, no, they are not the indigenous people. They are Europeans and Asians. Only Black people of Black phenotype, who are the same phenotype of Africans, they were the people. So even though in your logical, intelligent mind that hasn't been traumatized says, oh, I'm saying African, I'm saying indigenous, they hear that and they still use the cognitive dissonance and say, so I need to, if you would just indulge me, and I want to get back to asking more really great questions. Were these people who we know as indigenous, as far as scientific record, were these people Black people who we know as Africans, or were they the people who we know who resemble the Native Americans of today, the Navajo, the Apache,
Yeah, I think the latter.
Please clarify.
There's no evidence.
I hate for you to seem like you're on the stand, but you are so reliable, and you are. So I just need you to say.
There's no evidence of anyone arriving in the Americas and noting the existence of Black people. I mean, that to me has to be of some importance, because there's a lot of sources and literature based on those sources describing what people were like when the first Europeans arrived. And nowhere in that set of sources is there any indication that the indigenous people, as you say, descended from those that came through the Bering Strait. There's no indication that they were Black.
Thank you.
They clearly weren't white, but they were certainly not. There's no evidence at all of an African component in their makeup.
La da da da. Hey, goodbye. Good riddance. Hold up.